Welcome to Making Action Happen with Sarah Blackhurst. We're here to discuss public policy issues in our home state of Colorado and beyond. Making Action Happen is presented by Action 22. Find out more about our organization at action22.org. Now, here is your host, Sarah Blackhurst.
Hi, welcome back to Action 22, the Making Action Happen show that we do for our entire region and across the country. I'm Sarah Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McKay.
Hi. So I wanted to give, before we start, we've got a really interesting discussion for you today. Before we start that discussion, I wanted to give out two shout outs. I'm taking a personal liberty to do these. The first shout out I wanted to give to our show's executive producer, Tracy Motley. Tracy is out of Phoenix, Arizona. He is with the Voice America Network. And he has done such a great job for us. When we came on last fall onto the network, he has helped us and really given us a lot of great feedback, but has been super supportive and just helping us to get the show better all the time. We got to visit with him last week and just wanted to give a shout out to him. And then this is a personal one, but I wanted to give a shout out to one of my best friends from college, Matthew Shaden, turns 50 years old today. That's hard to imagine, but happy birthday to you, Matthew. He listens to the show all of the time. So what we're going to talk about today, and we have a very, very, very important high-level VIP to talk with us about this today. But the question I'm posing is, why is housing the most important question that we're not talking about when it comes to economic development or economic health and energy in Colorado? So to help talk to us about this today, I'm going to introduce Reg Rudolph. Reg Rudolph is the CEO for San Isabel Electric Association. It's an electrical co-op. And full disclosure, Reg is also on the Action 22 board. So welcome, Reg.
Hey, thanks, Sarah.
So Reg is known for being super nerd. He says that I'm the only one that's allowed to call him that, but I'm just the only one that calls that to him to his face. He reads all the time. He understands everything that surrounds electric co-ops in Colorado. And if he doesn't already know it, he is passionate about research. We'll say it that way. So Reg, appreciate you being on the show today. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing a big summit. It's an energy summit. We've brought a whole lot of people together, but to talk about energy and energy expansion in Southern Colorado and for this whole area. And I wanted to do this with you because this was a really important topic that I wanted to discuss that we're just not going to have time to discuss tomorrow. So first, tell us a little bit about, for people who maybe don't understand or who've never been part of an electrical co-op, will you give us a little history on San Isabel Electric, the electric co-op, how that works exactly?
All right. Well, San Isabel Electric has been in business since 1938, serving Southern Colorado. And being an electric cooperative, we're not-for-profit, so we're member-owned. And we're a service-based business, not a profit-based business. So if you buy your electricity from San Isabel Electric or any other electric cooperative, you actually are an owner of the company. Specifically about San Isabel Electric, just some background, is that we serve about 50,000 people in Southern Colorado. Our distribution plant, if you strung all the poles and wires out into a straight line, you'd start in Anchorage, Alaska and end up in Tallahassee, Florida. Our service territory is pretty large over Southern Colorado. It's the size of Rhode Island, Delaware, and Connecticut combined. And we do it with 80 employees. So we're very efficient in what we do, and we have to do it because serving rural Colorado with a lot of the sparse areas and density that we have, you have to be efficient to make sure that it's affordable for people to live in rural Colorado.
We've been, our household and my mom and dad before us and continue, we've been members of San Isabel Electric for a really long time. There's a little bit difference between a member owned and a investor owned. What are some of those nuances?
I think the fundamental difference, besides the profit motive, is that my board of directors is made up of people that are member owners and member consumers themselves. So to be on the board of directors and to be a part of the governing body, you have to be a consumer of the organization. So really, it's a grassroots democratic effort. Governed by those that we serve. So my 7 board members are spread out throughout our service territory, and they're very, very close to the end use consumer. So if a member has a concern or a complaint, they can call their director or they can call me and they'll get me.
And that's true. And everybody knows who their directors are because they vote on them from their region. So it's set up regionally. So everybody that's voting actually knows who they are voting for, and they've met them personally usually, and they're longtime members of the community. So it has a whole different sort of hometown, homegrown flavor to it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the purest form of the cooperative business model is the purest form of democracy because it's transparent. Everybody can participate to the nth degree that they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you had a huge effort, or you initiated a huge effort to really understand the economic landscape of the region that you served, especially coming out of COVID. And you started a project, about mid-year of 2020?
So we were probably rounding third base about mid-year 2020. And just a little background is that our board has had on their strategy map for a couple of years, wanting to be more involved in economic development. But economic development is a broad term. So what does it mean? Well, I'll know it when I see it. Well, what we did internally was we started an evaluation process of evaluating our entire service territory to find out how can we make an impact with economic development. And there's a lot of opportunities, but there's not necessarily opportunities that we can control or make an impact. And what we found when we went through the process, there was a number of opportunities and industries, but the thing that really rose to the top, and it was a surprise at how prevalent of a problem it was and how impactful it could be to address, and it was housing. It was such a major issue, and everybody understood. But when you see it in the data, it's like, oh my, here's an opportunity we need to address.
So I know from working with you the past few years, you're a very lateral thinker. When you started asking these questions, did you think that housing was going to be the answer that you came up with that needs to be addressed?
Absolutely not. I think the outcome that everybody thought is that we would get involved in workforce development and maybe, how do you dig into getting into the high schools with a program, maybe the trade school aspect of it. Never in our wildest dreams did we think the most impactful priority would be housing.
So how did you arrive at that? I mean, that's an interesting, because we've seen this in a couple of different things. We saw this on a completely different front when we worked on what's now called the Copper Project with our AG, and housing kept coming up. But this came up several years ago for Action 22 when we were looking at the asbestos issue. How did you guys arrive at housing?
Well, it just kind of it ended up on our lap when you go through the data and you start to look at the output. The anecdotal evidence, you see it, and then when we actually seen the data, it was like, oh, that makes sense. San Isabel Electric has lost several qualified workers due to the lack of housing that exists in Warfano and Los Animas counties, as an example. And then you start backing into it, and it's like, okay, yeah, now we see it, and now we see the lack of housing creates a number of problems. Whether it's having an employer, I mean, you can develop a project, create jobs, but if there's no place for people to work, the business is either going to fail or people are going to have to drive in and pull from a different workforce. So it really started to become kind of common sense after you started to dig into it.
So what is it about housing that is lacking? And so just really quick, we have listeners from all over the country and even in other countries. They're not going to understand what the housing, like what's the problem with housing is the question, going to be the big question. So what's the barrier there?
Well, I think the first barrier is that just the tremendous shortage that exists, and when you start to look at the opportunity for immigration of residents, if there's no housing, there's no opportunity, but it's also contributing to the loss of an existing workforce that can't find housing to stay in their market. And some of the things that we've seen that came out of the data is you will have renters come into a community, and for the most part, a lot of the analysis is predicated on rental properties, is that it forces renters to rent above and below their means. And this is a new term for me that you know, obviously I'm a utility guy, so you learn new things every day, but for somebody to rent below their ability I think I lost you for a second.
Oh, we
I'm
lost
back.
you. You're back. Okay.
Okay, so sorry.
Technical difficulties.
Exactly. I apologize for that. But the moral of the story is that when people come in and can pay a higher rent, but they buy or they rent the only thing that's available, that they're taking away a resource from somebody that should be renting that. So it's kind of this circular problem when you have such a shortage of housing. So housing costs should be no more than 30% of a person's income, and we have some people that are paying more that just because that's the only thing that's there. So the right supply and in the right balance to match the income was something that we found in the study that was so important for us. You need a good inventory of housing for different people.
So if there's such a need for that, why isn't it happening?
But well, the obvious answer is just to construct more housing, right? And that's a critical piece of the puzzle. But private development has really been very limited for housing, whether it's new construction, for ownership, or new construction for rental. And Sarah, as you know, I'm a data guy because every decision in life could be made with an Excel spreadsheet.
Correct.
But the data shows that very few new developments have happened in rural southern Colorado over the last several decades. Some of the data shows 75% of the housing stock within our service territory was built before 1980, and 87% of renters are living in housing that's now more than 40 years old. So tackling this aging housing stock is going to be a monumental task and a puzzle for rural economic development. So you start to see how this aging infrastructure, beneficial electrification with energy industry coming, it all starts to dovetail into if we want to keep people in rural Colorado and we want to attract people to rural Colorado, they have to have a place to live. Right. That's kind of the beginning of the economic development food chain.
Right. So when we took a deep dive on this a few years ago, and we didn't look at, again, it wasn't a housing thing that we were looking at the time. It was a construction and an asbestos abatement issue. The asbestos abatement for all these homes that you just said are 40 years old or more. And that's a lot of those houses. To do any kind of update or anything on it is so cost prohibitive that they haven't been able to do the kind of updates. Now, I know that's the issue on asbestos. Are there any other issues with regard to that?
Well, I think when you look at the older stock and the older envelopes of homes, they could all benefit from weatherization and making sure they're more efficient, and you can conserve energy in the facility, in the envelope of the house that's there, whether it's a house or a commercial building. So yeah, I can remember the asbestos issue, and that's scary. But I mean, if we're going to keep people in the limited stock of housing that we have today, we need to elevate it. We also need to build new housing.
Right. So to do both.
Right.
So I think the other issue when we really look at that is water. Was that a part of your study at all?
That really didn't hit the radar screen because
Okay.
with us being an electric utility, water is really outside of our wheelhouse. And one of the parameters that the board had set for us at the staff level was do something that you can be impactful with. What can we do to move the needle to help people in Southern Colorado?
Right. Okay, so let's go back to we understand the asbestos side of it a little bit better. How do you weatherize? I mean, how do you do that for these older homes?
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities, and on the energy front with beneficial electrification, the state of Colorado is really pushing the generation, the electric industry and the fossil fuel industry towards decarbonization. So when we start to look at an envelope, the best return on investment opportunities are things like insulation, windows, mechanical systems, electric mechanical systems, heat pumps that are more efficient in the process. Make sure that the structure isn't just leaking the energy that you're consuming, because not only can you decarbonize your generation portfolio, but if you're not wasting energy, that has no carbon footprint.
Right. That all sounds great. But it's that's very cost heavy to do that for people's homes.
Exactly. I mean, that's part of the data that we're starting to gather and develop now, is that the number one thing that limits somebody from doing an upgrade to their home, just because a home is 40 years old doesn't mean you should just dispose it and start over. I mean, you can upgrade it, but the upfront costs are the major detractor for people doing these things. And that's part of what we're really getting into now, is making sure that we can mitigate or minimize the impact for members and non-members to make those investments as we go forward.
So how are you doing that?
Well, what we've done, we had this idea about 4 or 5 years ago to start a division of our company called Empower. So we've got this energy services division of San Isabel Electric called Empower, and we don't only just come in and assess for our members and non-members their homes for energy efficiency needs. Excuse me, but we also make the recommendations to manage those projects and help them get contractors, as well as financing the projects all together, so that those upfront costs can be paid with the savings, kind of a pay as you save as you go through the process. And that way it becomes affordable for those people to make those upgrades and stay in those homes.
How many people, or what percentage of your consumers or your members are taking advantage of those right now?
Well, as we get started, over about the last year and a half, we've made contacts and improvements with about 300 homeowners and businesses within our service territory. So we've been sneaking up on it as we go, and we're getting ready to launch more and more products and services in leveraging with local contractors. And just kind of an anecdotal example is that if you're somebody that lives in Aguilar or La Vida, it's very difficult for you to get a contractor to come in and do electrical work or mechanical work. But if we can go out and we can market to our members a product and or service, we can get a contractor, we can keep their attention if we have 20 projects. So that's one of the things that we try to do, and that's really to the core mission of an electric cooperative, is aggregating and cooperating, coming together for the benefit of all.
So you can, and we have an electrician, Greenhorn Electric, on our board. He's also on the Action 22 board, and he is so busy all the time. He can't keep up with everything that he's doing. So your idea is to have a whole bunch of projects put together, ready to go, and then we can recruit additional electric or any kind of the utility upgrade folks to come down, contractors to come down.
Right. And that's part of the economic development that I think is ancillary to this project, is being able to get those contractors working in the towns that they typically wouldn't go to in a one-off. In a perfect world, we'd get to the point where we build enough business where somebody wants to open up an electrical shop in Levita or a mechanical shop in Walsenburg, so that we can get those services in those smaller towns that at one time had robust trade services. So hopefully we can, with this, generate enough business that we can get that activity back in those smaller communities.
Have you, in any of this, have you run any numbers to say this is how much we need to add to the housing stock in this community, or is that the next part of your research?
That's what's being developed internal right now at San Isabel Electric, is that in each of these communities that we serve in, what sort of stock do we need? How can we put together a spec? How can we work with building contractors and get that quantity? Laura Getz, who's our business development manager internal at San Isabel Electric, is working with all these stakeholders in the communities. And I know that there is actually some private developers looking at these communities as well. So if we can leverage those relationships with those people that know how to build rental properties and develop land and so forth, is that our ultimate role is to act as a facilitator to make sure these things happen.
Right. So along that vein, you have a project that you're calling RPACE, or the Residential Property Assessed Clean Energy. Will you talk to us a little bit about that?
So our PACE is the residential side of the CPACE program, and it's an innovative financing mechanism for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects at the residential and commercial level. And the beauty of the PACE program, and one of the things that I mentioned earlier, is the upfront cost is a barrier to entry. On the backside, for financing these projects, it's always the risk. What happens if somebody doesn't pay, or who's going to backstop that? And if you want to make these investments, you want to do it at the lowest cost possible. And as an electric utility, an electric cooperative, we have very low cost financing. So to pass that benefit on, we need to really just de-risk the projects. But a PACE program allows the property owner to finance those upfront costs, and we can basically finance it through the property and pay it back over time. So it's a way to de-risk the process of upgrading somebody's home at the lowest cost possible. And like I said, the commercial project, or the commercial PACE program, is already in existence. There's a little bit of reluctance, I think, at the state level to do the RPACE program, but it's something that we're going to start pushing on pretty hard, because we feel that this housing issue for rural Colorado is a pressing need. So we're going to hopefully be able to get the ear of some legislators going forward.
So that brings me to, and I don't want to get too far into it, because of course we're going to be talking about it tomorrow, and we're just about out of time with you right this second. But are you guys considering the implications of beneficial electrification in all of these processes, or is this sort of a curveball for you?
Sorry, I lost you just for a second. You started about
that's okay.
beneficial electrification.
Yeah, is beneficial electrification, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow during the summit, but the beneficial electrification, is that a piece that you were already considering, or is this going to be a curveball for you?
This has kind of all been part of the overall strategy with Empower going forward, is that the political push in Colorado is to decarbonize the energy sector. So for us, we believe that working on efficiency in the commercial and residential sectors, that's the best solution for energy. As I said, the energy that you don't use has no carbon footprint. So decarbonization through electrification with a power supplier that's lower in carbon can really accelerate the goal for Colorado. But the challenge is massive. And when you start to look at us serving 50,000 people, we probably serve somewhere in the ballpark of 20,000+ homes just in our service territory. And you look at over the Action 22 footprint, the challenge is going to be massive going forward. But one of the missions of an electric cooperative is to help people. And it wasn't easy when we started this business, and it's not going to be easy going forward, but we're going to continue on our mission of service and helping people as we look to the future, whatever that holds. As you know, Sarah, when politics are involved, everything becomes a curveball.
True that. So we'll do a little bit better discussion on beneficial electrification tomorrow at the Energy Summit. You'll be able to track that and listen to that live on Facebook, on the Facebook channel, our Action 22's Facebook. We're going to do it there, and we'll hear more from Reg. Reg, thanks for being with us so much. We'll see you tomorrow, and we appreciate all the great work that you do for us.
And we appreciate everything that Action 22 does for Southern Colorado. Thanks for being our voice, Sarah.
I appreciate you. When we come back, we'll talk about some more curveballs that we're looking to see if what kind of pitch we should actually be throwing when we come right back. Hi, welcome back to Making Action Happen. I like Reg Rudolph so much.
Yeah.
I don't know why it is nerds just make me so happy.
No, he's good. And it's as we travel down this road of economic development, recovery, and restart, it's interesting what keeps coming up. You look at the problem or the issue, and right now that's economic recovery, development, restart. And the thing that keeps coming up, no matter who we talk to, is housing. And that's the availability of housing, the cost of housing, getting new housing, refabbing the old housing. And it's just a key factor in the equation that I think everybody in this business can agree on.
Well, and I think it's hard to conceptualize when you are in a more urban area where you see construction happening all the time. Housing is new, apartments are readily available, and there's lots of layers to the issue of why we don't have the housing we need to recruit the workforce that we're going to need for this incredible energy expansion that we're going to see happening.
Yes. And ironically, you go back 10 years ago, housing wasn't the problem, it was the workforce. And then I saw it transition over the years to we have the workforce, but we don't have the housing. So you can have a company come in, start up, and we have people ready to work, or people could come from the outside, but there's nowhere for them to go. And a lot of people on the layman, as you would say, on the street, they say, well, I drive down, this road and there's a lot of empty houses. Why don't they just use those? And that gets back into how old are the houses? Do they have asbestos? Lead paint's another one that comes up. If you had a house built before 79, I think it is, there's the issue of lead paint in the house. And in Pueblo and Walsenburg, a lot of these rural communities, the houses are way older than, 30, 40 years. And that's an issue.
So when we did the deep dive, and I think it was the summer of 18, what we found was and I guess the big problem and how we got into this whole thing was it was more cost prohibitive to tear something down or to actually rebuild or make the modifications that were necessary than to just leave it the way it is.
Yeah.
And especially on the asbestos side. And there's a whole several things that go into that. And we actually ended up working with CDPHE and making some recommendations for them. But so not only does it cost a lot for somebody to come and do the inspection, there's all the regulations that go with asbestos. But it also costs a lot to get rid of it, to dispose of it, and it's the same with lead paint. It's same with all of those things with these houses that are very, very old. So you look at a house, we drive by, everybody who drives through Walsenburg sees that same house.
I know the house.
Everybody knows the house. Yep. And it's become a bit of a public health hazard.
Yeah.
Because not only is it just sitting there with all the problems that go with it, but it tends to be where homeless people hang out. Yeah. Or there's a lot of I don't know, what's the word, squatting that happens in these homes that you're like, oh, these homes are sitting empty, but a lot of squatting happens on these. And then when that kind of thing happens and they're abandoned homes and you're trying to find the people who own them, it ends up becoming the problem of the municipality.
Yes.
And so every municipality has a list of homes or a list of properties that something needs to be done with them. And they only have so much money that they can do anything with that.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing that's really hard to think about, what you do with that.
Yeah. And I know the house in Walsenburg, I think we call it the Fight Club house. It looks like the house from Fight Club. It's on the main street when you drive down there. Yep. The Fight Club house. Yeah.
It looks like they're doing something with it now, but the reason that they haven't done anything with it before is that they just can't afford to do it.
Yeah,
and it's when you're in the hole, you can, there's not a lot of people that can afford to be in the hole on their main property or in several properties.
Yeah.
On the upside, we know of people who are doing really well flipping homes.
Yes.
And so they flip them and they sell them, but that's still not answering the questions on.
Yeah. And it's, there's another problem that comes with that. You look at property price, the cost of property increase.
Yeah.
Just even in Pueblo, one thing about Pueblo is we always have affordable housing. That's the lure of Pueblo. That's why you have people that work in Colorado Springs. You have, soldiers from Fort Carson or airmen from Peterson that live in Pueblo. It's just the cost of housing is cheaper down here. But just in the past, I would say 3 or 4 years alone, the housing cost is skyrocketing in Pueblo. And,
True.
Which is good. It means that the economy is doing great. There's people coming in, there's jobs. But on the flip side, drives up the price of rent. You're seeing rent increases. I know a few cases around the area, not just in Pueblo, where somebody's rent went up $300 this year. They go to sign their lease again, and again, it goes up $300. Can they afford that? I don't think their income went up to match that at the time. And a lot of people, their income went down, or if they may not even have a job right now. So that's tough. So there is a negative effect of the housing market thriving. Real estate, just almost everywhere in Colorado right now is just booming. I mean, that's the job to get. If you want to go into real estate, now's the time to do it.
Yeah. And we know people who are doing that right now too.
Yes, we do.
So, and I think here's the other thing, when you think about this in the whole move for decarbonization, the move away from fossil fuels, the infrastructure that has to happen in order to put into the grid, there's all the discussions are around that right now.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about expanding, you're talking about, there's not a lot of solar farms or wind farms that are going to happen right in Pueblo, in the city of Pueblo. It's all these rural areas where the housing stock is so short. So now we're adding onto the cost of the housing, we're adding onto commutes and how these workers and this workforce, all of it is going to have to do a whole different thing. So I've thought about that a lot, actually, about how the workers to build and manage this decarbonization are going to have to do a lot of on the road traveling. And what's that impact? And are we thinking about how to make all of this balanced?
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't thought of that. That's interesting. It's building the clean energy, but using a lot of not so clean energy to get there to build the clean energy.
To build the clean energy. So then we're talking about, okay, so let's build homes in this.
Yeah.
And there's not, the infrastructure's not in place yet to do everything that we're committing Colorado to do on that energy front. So that's actually what we're going to be talking about quite a bit at our summit tomorrow, our energy summit. We're going to be talking about, there's 4 topics that we're going to, or 3 topics that we're going to actually be covering. And I'm really fascinated with it, what's happening in energy storage. I'm super fascinated with this. What's going on in energy storage? What's different from 2 years ago and from 5 years ago? So, and what's the impact on that? And then the other big thing is, how do they tax energy storage? How do you tax batteries? So that's one of the big questions happening right now.
Which is also in the legislature as we speak.
It is. We're also going to be talking about beneficial electrification. There's a lot of things going on about.
So explain to me and people who may not know, what is beneficial electrification?
That's a great question. So they've actually, this is a brand new term. This is a term that they've come up with very recently. We actually have the person who has designed or who has created the term, and he's had a lot of input. He's going to kick off that discussion tomorrow. And I don't have his name right in front of me, but he will be talking about what exactly is beneficial electrification. But I think it's finding that balance between upgrading, bringing more electric to your home, making your home weatherized, all those things. Like how far can you push it before it stops being beneficial?
Yeah. And going back to the first part of the show, my house is, I think it was built in 74. It needs to be weatherized, and there are programs through your provider that they offer to help you with that process, like he was talking about earlier. But initially, I wanted to weatherize my house.
Okay.
It's really hot in the summer and gets really cold in the winter, which is any house that's over 20 years old, 30 years old right now. I signed up for the program. I had him come in and look at it, and I saw how much it would cost. And I was like, well, we will just be cold this winter and hot in the summer, because it is pricey. I mean, you're not talking $5,000, you're talking 20 grand to come in. That's not even counting like a new furnace, a new air conditioner, insulation. It costs a lot. And for most people, they just can't afford it, nor do they want to. Do they want to get in debt for 20 grand to redo their house?
It's a lot to ask.
I couldn't do that right now.
Yeah, you can't do that right now. And what's the ROI? How many years out are you on an ROI on that?
Yes, and that's true too. It's kind of like somebody once told me in a building, they had a commercial building and they switched to all LED lights. And I mean, it was a larger building, but you're talking $500,000. So they went in, everything's LED, $500,000. But when would they start actually saving money? When would this return of investment come? It was like 25 years down the road.
25 years.
Yep.
To recoup. And I mean, $500,000 is a lot of money. That's more than most homes around here are by a long shot. I think the median home price in the Action 22 footprint is what, 200?
Something like that. Yeah.
So it's like maybe 250.
Yeah.
But so that kind of investment sounds crazy, but if you're not going to start to see savings for 25 years, nobody has that kind of money laying around.
Also, people don't think like that.
Right.
As Americans, we want our savings now. We don't want it 25 years down.
We want everything right now.
Yeah, we want it right now.
Right this second.
Or just as humans. That's not even as Americans. That's just human nature.
Yeah. The last thing we're going to be talking about tomorrow is transmission infrastructure. So Xcel Energy is doing this brave thing with trying to create I think they're calling it a transmission superhighway, but they're working with everybody else, all the other players. So Tri-State, Black Hills, the co-ops, CRA, everybody's going to try to work on this to do this big superhighway. It's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about that some more tomorrow as well.
So that would be modernizing our aging infrastructure when it comes to transmission.
Modernizing our aging infrastructure. So that also lends to, and there's been some discussion. We were on a call with the governor and with Senator Garcia and Chris Hansen and a few others a week or so ago, when they were trying to decide, okay, what should the stimulus money look like? Where should it be? The governor's released really where the priorities are on that. There's details are still, like really specific details are still coming, but the top of the list is going to be small business support. And then I think infrastructure, but really wanting to get that small business support out there. So he's got a list of priorities on that. We've looked at it just a little bit. I don't know. Do you think it's how impactful do you think that particular giving a bunch, like doing that part is going to be?
We'll see.
We'll see.
I mean, it all looks good on paper and it sounds good, but the devil's in the details. So we will see how that plays out.
We'll see how that plays out. We'll see how the rest of the budget's going to look. Of course, there was lots of discussions about that budget, but it's the whole issue is the federal government's giving states a bunch of money, and then now it gets who's going to decide, how are they going to decide how that money should go, and that's going to be tough, especially I think because not all the money from last time was spent.
No, it wasn't. Keep going back to that. And I think President Biden is looking to sign it tomorrow. That's what they're saying, or maybe it was today. I haven't been paying attention to the news.
I haven't.
So we're going to see that fast. That's all going to be coming down within the week.
It's going to move really fast, and I think everybody's going to try to get in position. And I think I'm going to play the optimist for a change, and I'm going to say, because we've sort of been through this once before as far as stimulus, we're going to have a little bit better idea how to navigate that, and hopefully how to navigate the past or last year's stimulus with this year's stimulus, and do that. There's one more shout out I wanted to give that I just remembered, and I need to say this to Kate Greenberg, who is our ag chair or ag commissioner for Colorado. So there was an issue with hemp, and I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
So there's a lot of hemp development, especially in the San Luis Valley, and of course the Farm Bill says how this is all supposed to go and what the rules. So they're creating new rules. So one of the issues that one of our Action 22 members, and he's been on the show and he's on our board, Kevin Wilkins, brought to us that he had gotten some funds to help develop some ag producers in the San Luis Valley. For hemp.
Yes.
So, and it was specifically for hemp, and he went after it and everybody was good with it, but the rules didn't quite match up.
Colorado is still operating under an older farm bill that did not include the provisions for hemp. So seeing that Colorado was not operating under the newer farm bill that did have the provisions for hemp, the funding for it could not come through because under the old farm bill, hemp was still considered, I think, illegal, or was unable to tie federal funds with that.
So what the disconnect was that even though everything else in Colorado is operating on the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp is still operating on their 2014 Farm Bill. And she sent this to me yesterday because we reached out because Kevin Wilkins was not able to fund, even though the money was there and they said they could fund it because there was a disconnect on the rules.
Yes.
So we reached out to Kate and she sent me, and she started working on this right away, and she sent this to us yesterday. And I just wanted to give a shout out to her for working on this. You're not going to have an answer until next year on this, but I think everybody's working together to try to help develop hemp to add to our ag portfolio in Colorado. So what they're going to do is they have to do a revised state plan. That deadline for that is the end of March. So it's the end of this month. And then the review of that draft for the members by March 31st. And then they're going to have stakeholder engagement and so on and so forth. So they're really trying to lead the way on hemp because there's not a lot of other states who are developing hemp in a really productive and impactful way, the way it's happening in Colorado. So they are working on it, but I just wanted to say I appreciated that she took our call, she acted on it, and then she did a great job following up. So she did good. It's not going to happen for our folks this year, but hopefully for next year we can get them. And these guys are great. I think about Monty, that is down in Del Norte. And they've been developing hemp for quite a while, but once this happens, they can start to insure those crops and do the things that they need to do with that. So anything else that came up this week?
No, just a bit under the weather.
You've been a bit under the weather.
Yeah.
We have the other thing is we have a big our board meeting, and it's one of our policy meetings is tomorrow in the morning. And we're going to be having a lot of discussions on some of the legislation that's been introduced. And there's a lot of really, a lot of legislation in a lot of different arenas that are coming at us this next little bit. So that's going to be, we have a lot to discuss on that. And I wish we had time to do a deep dive on today's show on it, but we just don't. There's just so much, but it's also a lot of it surrounding energy, a lot of it surrounding ag, and then transportation is going to be the next really big discussion. So for those of you who aren't from Colorado, we'll just tell you that transportation is one of those really, really big issues that we've been talking about for 150 years, how to do roads and bridges, but the new big term is multimodal, and really how we pay for everything that we want to do and that we need to do in Colorado, above and beyond. I mean, we need to take care of our roads and bridges, and that's a big thing.
And again, acting like the layman who doesn't understand these terms, what is the definition of multimodal?
So we're going to have Mike Beasley on again to explain multimodal to us, because he actually helped write that definition. But it's multimodal is electric car. It includes electric cars. It includes light rail. It includes autonomous vehicles. It includes all the other things basically besides roads and bridges. So when you and I in rural Colorado talk about transportation, we're concerned about roads and bridges.
Yes.
If you are in a ski area, you're thinking something different when you talk about transportation. And so they've had to start to break this up. So there's actually a glossary of terms now around transportation for that exact reason.
So would multimodal be more of the Denver metro areas?
Yes, it's funny you say that.
Just thinking of that, just how you briefly defined it, electric cars, light rail, we don't have any of that in our area.
We have none of that in our area. And
so I'm guessing we're going to talk about how that's going to impact the Action 22 area.
We're going to talk about how it's going to act, but more importantly, how is this, in my view, how is this going to be funded? Because in Colorado, we've tried multiple times to pass any kind of initiative to raise taxes to pay for transportation. And every single time that gets rejected. So the gas tax is in question. That's how we've paid for it. So some people say we need to pay for it with, there's everybody has an idea how to do this. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion on fees that are going to be put on different things. And so the idea is, well, if this is something that you use, then you should pay for it. So we should increase fees on a variety of things, and it'll be in a whole lot of different places, but it's a little bit like 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, that's the other part. Whenever this gets brought up over the years through the state, even the federal side, looking out for Action 22 and our members, how does this benefit us?
Yes.
Because so far it hasn't. You've seen massive amounts of road construction, infrastructure, everything go on in the Denver metro area. Why down here we still have dirt roads?
Yeah, we still have to, our roads that are just
Or bridges that are
horrible.
that need to be fixed. So I think whenever we discuss transportation, and we do this, Action 22 has been a strong advocate for this. I'm just playing the devil's
Forever.
advocate.
Yeah.
We really, really, really have to keep the pressure on that any type of fee increase, any type of tax, anything like that, we need to make sure that those funds are coming to rural Colorado, to the Action 22 area.
And that the more than how are we benefiting? What harm is being done?
Yes.
Is there harm that's being done? Are we ending up just by our small numbers having to carry more of a burden than some of our neighbors in urban areas?
And I know that the governor doesn't like the term the rural metro, the Denver rural divide, but that's how we see it.
Yeah.
And it's there. It actually, it's a thing.
So we're going to end on that note because it's a much deeper discussion and we'll take that. Hey, Chad Borthman, I know you're listening. I still haven't gotten my invitation for March 20th and all the great barbecues that are happening there. Join us next week when I will ask more overly complicated questions and Brian will make another valiant effort to suppress his sarcastic tendencies. We'll see you guys next week.